very warm welcome. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our LEAP webinar, De-siloing Resource Management and Strategic Workforce Planning. We're super excited to see you all here in the room. I'm Nora. I'm your host for today's webinar. When I'm not in a webinar and have the pleasure to guide those conversations, I am a transformation consultant, helping teams to design better ways of working, those that actually are purposeful, flexible, and make sense for the people doing the work. And before we dive into our wonderful topic today, we have a quick check-in question to get started. So we would like to ask you, please share in the chat, how mature would you say your strategic workforce planning currently is in the organization you're in? And David, Lisa, feel free to join us. We're going to do it on a scale from 1, meaning more on the immature side of things, towards 10, meaning my strategic workforce planning in the organization I'm in is very mature. So just don't overthink it, share a number in the chat, and let's see where we're at collectively. The first answers are coming in. I love it. We've got a 4 to 5, a 4, a 3-ish, 3, 4, 2. Okay. So
This is not unexpected.
yes, actually, it's a good sign because this means there's a lot to learn, and that's exactly what we're here for. So, thank you, everyone who participated. I would say, without having calculated it, the average is probably around 3. So, maybe after today's session, we can lift it up by 1 or 2 numbers so you can be a multiplier in your organization. That would be a great goal. Wonderful. So this session is part of Run Sleep webinar series where we spotlight bold ideas, authentic experiences, and practical strategies shaping the future of resource management and beyond. This webinar series is sponsored by Run, a purpose-built tool to make capacity and resource planning smarter, faster, and more human. We'll use the last 10 to 15 minutes for any question and answers. So as you listen along our conversation, feel free to capture any questions that pop up in the Q&A section of Zoom webinar. And also feel very invited to share any reactions and any thoughts in the chat. Just make sure to send it to everyone. And now, it's my absolute pleasure to introduce our stellar panel today. First up, we've got David Edwards. He is Chief Workforce Strategist at Dark Artistry and one of the leading global voices in strategic workforce planning. It's a real honor to have him here. He has implemented and led strategic workforce planning in Ericsson and UK's NatWest Bank, and has also led Vizia's workforce planning advisory practice. He is also a member of the Workforce Planning Institute's Global Standards Committee and is a regular co-chair of its London conference. And on top of that, as you can see on the shared screen, he also is the author of the Strategic Workforce Planning Handbook, also in his background, as he's correctly pointing out, where he makes the case that workforce planning should shape strategy, not simply react to it. And thank you, Edem, for sharing the link to his book. You can find it in our chat, so definitely worth a read. Just a fun fact, I just asked ChatGPT if it's worth a read, and ChatGPT agreed, definitely recommended. So it's approved by AI and humans alike. Do check it out. It's a great read. And also joining David, we've got Lisa, equally excited to have you on the panel, Vice President of Customer Success and Sales at Run, and a longtime expert and enthusiast, both in resource management and capacity planning, with over 2 decades of experience in all sorts of different areas, such as project leadership, change management, customer success, and many more areas. Lisa works closely with organizations to connect resource planning with real operational outcomes. And Lisa is actually joining us for the second time, just like David, and she has been on the LEAP webinar before. So I would highly recommend checking out her first webinar on forecasting best practices for resource management, which to date is the number one watched video on YouTube with over 8,000 views. So definitely check this one out as well. And Edem is going to share this link. Yes, perfect, in our chat. So definitely after this webinar, check it out. David, Lisa, it's so wonderful to have you here today. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you.
Hi. Yeah, thank you for
Hello.
having us.
Nice. And because we have so many wonderful questions and so many exciting aspects to uncover today, I would suggest let's dive right into it. So, first question, I want to kick off by really understanding, and David, this one is pointed towards you initially. What is strategic workforce planning, if we put it very simply, beyond just headcount planning? And how does it connect to business objectives and growth strategy? Can you kick us off, David?
Yes, yes. Why don't you start with the easy ones first, Nora? But I think strategic workforce planning it's acquired an awful lot of baggage. And you can put 10 people in a room and get 20 different definitions of strategic workforce planning within a matter of minutes. But I think that it seeks to answer a very simple yet rather deep question, which is your workforce fit for its future business purpose? I said it was simple, but it's also pretty deep because when you think about that, the workforce is, well, let's break it down. The workforce, anyone and anything that's involved in the execution of the organization's strategy. And that can mean permanent staff, temporary staff. It could these days also mean staff who are supplied by third-party vendors. And it certainly means automata of some sort or other, whether that be AI bots, agents, or what have you. The business purpose, and I think in particular the future business purpose, organizations are changing constantly, and organizational strategy, business strategy, is supposed to define what it wants to be over a period of time. And just at the moment, that time horizon is diminishing. Some people say it's collapsing. I don't think it's collapsing completely, but it's certainly going down. That purpose, why does the organization exist? What does it seek to do? And last but not least, of course, is it fit? What do we mean by fit? I think for me, it means not something quite as familiar as do we have the right people in the right place at the right time, but do we have the people who are able to do the work which is going to be necessary to deliver on the organization's strategy? Do we have the capability? Do we have the number of people that we need? Do we have the people with the appropriate desire and aptitude? Yes, are they in the right places? Do they have the knowledge? Do they know how to respond to change? Because ultimately, when we talk about the future business purpose, we're more often than not talking about something that is not the same as it is right now. We're talking about some form of change that we're going to have to adapt ourselves to.
Brilliant.
Yeah. Does that help?
Wow. What a way to kick off, David. Are we done? That was
Well, I could go on for hours, but I think you might lose an audience.
awesome, Lisa. So now I'm super keen to hear from you. What would you add? What does it mean to you, strategic workforce planning? And when we think about the future of an organization's purpose, what time horizon are we looking at?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think David gave us a very good sort of in-depth analysis of what it is, because he's right. It's such a vast sort of field. From what I look at it, from my perspective, and when I try to sort of explain it to some of our customers, I look at it more as a sort of transformative core business function that is often undervalued or even unrecognized, right? When businesses, leadership teams start to look at their long-term plans, and when we're talking about long-term, I think David's right. I think that's starting to shorten that
Yeah.
horizon with the world we're in. But I think if we were previously, I would have said, where they want to be in 3 to 5 years, where now I might say where they want to be in 2 to 4 years, right? When they're looking at that, leadership teams, come up with plans and they come up with where they're going to either pivot, where they're going to invest more money in, because they want to drive some very specific outcomes, right? They want to grow in this field by 40%. They want to grow revenue year over year by 200%. So they have very, very, sort of defined goals of where they want to be in a certain part. And what's really core here is to achieve those business results, basically. They have to really understand their core resource, and their core costs, which is people, right? People are probably the number one cost for most businesses, and they are also what drives all of their revenue as well. So when we're looking at that strategic workforce planning part of it, the idea is that if they want to achieve those goals, they must link what their workforce is actually doing now, what they're going to be capable of delivering, and whether their skill sets are going to align with to help them achieve those business goals, right? So if they're wanting to pivot and they want to move to their market to, say, Europe, for example, if they're an American company moving to Europe and they're going to start by going into Italy or Germany, do they have the right staffing who can communicate in those languages, who have the right skills, who are willing to relocate? Can they hire in those areas, right? So it's not just reacting, it's almost becoming, proactive in the future to ensure that as you start to hire, as you start to look at what you're doing, you have the right people to drive those sort of higher level business outcomes.
Mm.
Mm.
I think it's also morphing, though. I think that the former strategic workforce planning I did, say, 7 or 8 years ago, is really quite different to what I'm doing now. And that's not just because of AI. It is because I think we've resolved in our own heads that the pace of change is so great that we have to think about more than just roles, or for that matter, skills. I think we have to understand much more about how the work is changing. And that in turn is also forcing us to confront, perhaps some uncomfortable truths about whether the way we work is also fit for its future business purpose. So there's this kind of sort of blurring of lines a little bit, I think, between organization design, organizational effectiveness, and strategic workforce planning in its sort of kind of traditional sense. It's a very fun time to be sort of in it. And I know that there are many people who would say, well, David, if this is fun, you need to get out more. But,
Well, David, I find that fun too. So I think that'll be sort of thrown at me as well. But I do have a really interesting question on what you just said. You were saying like right now the work, sort of what the work is doing. What are you finding is sort of the key parameter in that area of like, if it's not skills, it's not roles, it's the way the work is changing. AI is having an effect. What are you seeing sort of with the front lines of the type of things that the data points that, when we were starting to do this, we should be looking at today that we wouldn't have been looking at 8 years ago?
well, it would help a heck of a lot if we could actually alight on a consistent use of terms, because we trade and interchange words like capability, task, skill, competence with a fairly blithe naivety. I like the word capability because it describes something more than just a skill. It also describes, in my head at least, whether you are not just able to do the job, but you are willing to do the job and you are ready to do the job. You see, I think of people data like a solar system. I think there is this sort of core, if you like, the sort of the center of the solar system, which is this is what you are. But then you've got all of these orbiting. Sorry, I'm doing lots of strange squiggles, but these orbiting planets, which are various forms of attribute, which help to define an individual as they are at this particular point in time. And it might be, you know, how long they've been in that particular role. What age are they? Demographic does actually matter in this instance. What's their career ambition? What work have they done? Where have they been? What are they? I keep on knocking this microphone. What are they capable of doing, sort of going forward? And all of those things kind of make it up. Now, that makes it quite difficult to actually sort of land on something. Where I'm seeing people currently landing is trying to get some idea as to how work is changing and what capabilities that therefore means are in decline and also therefore on the increase. By identifying those capabilities, we can start to get a handle on the sort of skills we think people are going to need going forward, and that starts to become the menu for learning and development to go forward to retrain people. But there's this whole ecosystem that's sort of kind of still quite fragmented to make this really work.
Beautiful. So, what I'm hearing from both of you is that adaptability is a key skill for organizations in this time we're in now, and even more so going forward. And I find it so interesting the role that strategic workforce planning, along with other disciplines can play to be able to manage this unfolding future. Now, I would love to have a look at this specific relationship between strategic workforce planning and resource management, this intersection. When we look at organizations, these functions usually sit in different aspects, sides of any business, right? Lisa, can you talk us through what you have seen with clients, where they usually sit and how they currently work together, and what opportunity do you see for that changing?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think that touches a little bit about what David was just talking about, sort of that melding of capability.
Mhm.
Because of course, resource management is really sort of one of the pillars of strategic workforce planning, right? It is often the source of data because it is the place where you're going to get your capacity numbers, your availability numbers, and of course, some data related perhaps to skills and other data points you might want to be leveraging. But at the end of the day, what it is it's sort of the starting point to get you to be able to commit to doing some more in-depth strategic workforce planning. And I think what's really interesting is when David was sort of mentioning about, training, upskilling your team and figuring that kind of thing. It's succession planning and all those kinds of areas. That's what it sort of starts in a lot of in resource, like resource planning and resource management and capacity planning, because you're looking at your people and you're trying to understand exactly the sort of the capability that's possible for them. So not just the skills that they have, not the certifications, not just their education levels, but also what previous projects have they worked on? What are their preferences? What are the projects that they want to work on? Because we know that for a fact that when people have a passion for something, they are
Mhm.
going to be deliver better work, right? So we're looking at the sort of big picture, that big capability, all of these are factors that we're looking at. So when we were trying to look at, sort of see the future and do strategic resource planning, we need a place where you can kind of get all of that data and collect that data and sort of begin to analyze it to identify predominantly things like your gaps and also like where your upskill opportunities are, right? Where your succession planning is for you'll have some key employees, the ones that are, your rock stars that are working in all the projects. And what's going to happen if they leave? What happens if they retire, if they go to another job? Do you actually have a plan in place to succeed those people, to train your other employees to sort of get to that level to ensure that you can reach your business outcomes?
Well,
So when I look at, oh, go ahead, David. Yeah,
no,
go ahead.
no, I'm sorry. Atrocious at butting in, but
Oh, it's so difficult when we're in different rooms, right? So no, by all means, go ahead.
yeah, well, different continents as well.
Yeah.
It's a little bit sort of unhelpful, but anyway, you just touched on what I think is sort of the great unspoken um, potential that HR in general has here, and that is to talk about workforce as a form of risk and a form of feasibility risk, execution risk, and general operational risk. HR tends to be the receiver of strategy, and is basically told, "Well, get on with it. Go and find these people for me, and make it snappy." And we really need to be sort of saying perhaps with a slightly louder voice, whether it's SWP or resource management or whatever, actually, you know what, that's not going to fly. And this is where I think resource management in particular is it's much closer to the coalface. It understands not only the quite precise nature of the people who are working sort of on a day-to-day basis, but it also can see some of the risks emerging probably much earlier than somebody who's sort of working at my 30,000 feet level. Which is not to say that sort of that I can't see risks that are different because I can. We're getting quite good, I think, now at being able to sort of exercise judgment around how the synthesis of all these different signals, whether it be demand signals, geopolitical signals, pest or whatever, whatever, actually give you a great sense as to sort of exactly where the challenges might be and whether organizations are up to them. But knowing your people is fundamental to that. And I would say that what SWP is just trying to do is to provide a longer on-ramp for those functions responsible for delivering to resource management the kind of people that we need, rather than doing it on the short term.
Yeah, that's a good point, David, because I think a lot of organizations, when they sort of design their goals, they're like, okay, HR, we need these 15, we need this amount of capacity to deliver. What's missing is that, well, what's the decision? How do you get, is it just upskilling people? Do you need to hire? Do you have a bunch of people actually who have these skills that has just not been sort of surfaced, right? And I think that's where resource management it shines, right? It can show you that information. It can arm human resources department, people departments to make the better decisions to help support the business properly, right? So I think you brought up another point too, is like often resource management doesn't even sit under HR, right? It might sit under operations because it's
True.
more focused on efficiency, utilization rates, right?
Mm.
And the reality is it's when HR and operations sort of sees how connected they are, how they have to function together to sort of elaborate what David was saying. So when it all kind of comes together, that's when the real power really, builds for those
Yes.
organizations to leverage them.
It completely is. And there's this ecosystem which ought to exist, but somehow doesn't quite. And I know that we've talked about in the title of this, how do we sort of de-silo this? Well, there is this inherent problem that we don't seem to be speaking kind of the same language. In actual fact, I've just seen that Lisa has put in the chat, building an SWP ecosystem creates a shared language that changes the narrative from a business treating workforce planning as a standalone function. I
Absolutely.
love it.
Yeah.
I absolutely love that. That's exactly what this is about. And there is a challenge here for HR as well to speak and understand the language of business. What are we actually here for? We're here, to use the old, borrow the old NASA, and I apologize for the gender bias, in the phrase, but we're here to put a man on the moon. We're not here to create a better HR function so much as but in as much as it leads to business value, business benefit. And I think sometimes we overlook that.
hmm hmm Awesome. So when we talk about an ecosystem, can we now dive into how can we actually create it? What practically can we do? Everyone here on this call is playing some kind of role in the organizations we're in. What can we do? How can we get started? Lisa, can you share some thoughts?
Yeah, that is the sort of $10,000 question, right? How do you de-silo? How do you
That's
exactly what
why
we're saying?
you're here.
Yeah, I was gonna say they're speaking different languages, right? So how does sort of the resource management function get a seat at the table so that it is part, or a little bit of what one of our participants, Lisa, was saying is like, how does strategic workforce in the dream scenario, strategic workforce planning would be its own core business function, and we would have resource management data coming in, right? And HR data coming in that sense. But obviously, organizations change is always very, very difficult. I think for organizations that do this successfully, it is actually leveraging sort of that divide when you're in operations and HR, those are often sort of sitting separately and not necessarily communicating. But we're starting to see a sort of shift forward where when people are starting to see resource management as sort of the data source for strategic workforce planning, it does seem to start to have a better position in the organization. So one of the things we often recommend is we often get organizations that are very early in their maturity sort of journey in resource management, and they don't even have a resource manager, right? And of course, they'll move their way through, and then they'll get a resource manager, and then they'll start to that resource management function will start to push towards strategic workforce planning. And that's kind of where we're sort of seeing the much higher maturity, because that's exactly when they start to create that ecosystem, that shared language, which we're still seeing, we're not seeing. So when organizations are sort of at that stage where the resource managers are like, we need to start to push forward, this is when you really need to have your sort of operations leaders and your HR leaders really start to communicate. Now, how you do that works in many different ways in different organizations, but it really is about understanding that those two functions are not separate. They are really part of one, and convincing and ensuring that when you are looking at your resource management functions, that data is constantly being fed to HR, right? And one of the things that we find really useful is even when we're just sort of implementing and talking about SPWP, we make sure to invite, we're like, what else we invite? We got to invite all of these sort of key stakeholders, even if they're not really concerned about resource management. It's not really what they need. For them, they still need to hear about it. They need to see who their people are, who their workforce really are, to help them start to see the importance of them as they plan forward. And that tends to help sort of break those like very big silos where people are like, actually, when I look at it from this perspective, now I finally understand why it's important. It wasn't important because my day-to-day, I'm in customer success. For me, day-to-day resource management isn't super crucial because we're supporting customers. It's a very different workflow, right? But of course, the workflow, my team's skill set, their preference, their upskills, whether they're studying right now. We have a lot of people on my team learning about AI. That information, that amount of information is crucial for my CEO to know about so that she can make the right decisions, right? So it's making sure that she's starting to learn how important it is to understand that sort of data set, even if it isn't something that is directly related to their function.
Nice. So what I hear you say is also helping others see the bigger picture, connecting the dots and making information flow in all directions. And I just saw a lot of hearts coming from your way, David. So I would love to learn more about your love.
Yeah, I wasn't expecting that much that much screen action from me from my clicking on that reaction.
Lovely. Yeah.
Zoom is definitely going OTT, but yeah, look, the very idea that you should get a whole load of different people inside the same tent is still something that sort of, some organizations really struggle with. I'm not big into plugging the book, but one of the things I did talk about was change resistance, and the two killer lines in there. One was "You're from HR, go away," and the other was "We're from HR, go away." Those things do still sort of very much permeate through. I think you have to be prepared to collaborate relentlessly in this, and it means you have to be sort of quite resilient as well, and be prepared to put in front of people maybe uncomfortable truths that they won't be wanting to listen to for a while, but eventually they might actually come round and listen to. Use people analytics to actually sort of to show just what kind of opportunities that we're missing. Understand things like opportunity cost. Talk the language of cost as well, because people do respond remarkably well to the language of cost. But we're not terribly good at doing that. You have to, I think, also admit vulnerability sometimes and say, look, I'm trying to help here. If I can't help you, I'll go away. All right. And, if you don't want my help at this point, I'll go away. but you'll go off in search of somebody else who is interested in what you have to talk about, and that will create a FOMO moment in the minds of those who are less inclined. Um, don't be afraid to put yourself out there. What is it that Dave Ulrich said? He said, if ask someone in finance out to lunch, they'll always say yes because nobody ever asks them. Yeah.
Oh.
That's a good point. I was gonna say that is a really, yeah, that makes me laugh because I think that is a thing we often see, and one of our resource managers for one of the companies we service, obviously I'm not gonna say what it is, but she had a really funny story about how, and it's very much what David was saying is like she was like, oh, my new job is just I'm just a salesperson now. I just go and knock on everyone's doors, and she's
Mm.
like, I just like knock on everyone. I send everyone very quick insights, and she's like, all I'm doing is just knocking on the doors to make sure people are starting to pay attention. And of course, it is a process, but it's been successful for her, right? But it has been, a chore. She's had to learn how to almost sell what resource management can do, what strategic workforce planning can do to sort of get a seat at that table, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. It took me a year to land an invitation to the weekly meetings of the group strategy team, um, which I believed would be really useful in being able not necessarily to convey my own story, but to get information from them that I could then convey back to the other business areas so that they could see that I was actually adding something to their work because they weren't necessarily getting that communication through from group strategy as to what was being talked about for next year. How the heck are you supposed to actually sort of line your workforce up for the future if you don't even know what the strategy is supposed to be?
Amazing. And I
Oh,
love your term, David. I feel like that might be the title of your next book, Relentless Collaboration. That is awesome. And your point around vulnerability and just putting yourself out there and inviting others, being the first one, like to make the first step. I think that's yeah, a genuine act of kindness and also so helpful to create trust, right? To just start something. And even though this is not has not been done before, to make that leap of faith. That's
Oh,
brilliant.
I don't know about that, Nora. I think at my age, the next title is going to be Nurse, I Need Some Help.
Oh, come on. You're very sharp. There are many more books in the pipeline, I'm sure, before that one. I would like to invite everyone listening in to share your questions. We will soon be able to move over to the Q&A section. So feel free now to use the Q&A section for any of your questions. Lisa, I remember in our prep session, you talked about the resource management tool and how this can even be leveraged to foster connections with HR. Could you talk a little bit more about that point?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the things is, we often have companies that are, our customers will come in and it will not necessarily be the HR team that is driving any of the resourcing, right? It's often operations, it's PMOs, it's engineering teams. So they're not necessarily the HR team is just really the one that connects the data. Like we need the data, we need the employee data, their contract data, their cost of business, so resource management can really sort of drive sort of these data points to provide it really to sort of leverage it. And so what we kind of see is often like when you're in the resource management space, these people will use the data by getting that data to HR and saying, look, we're grouping our actually unmet demand to have more precise needs, like to really identify those more precise needs for future projects, right? Because of course, what you can do in any tool in resource management tools is you can actually, sort of do some scenario planning and say, okay, well, we've had these 10 projects coming. This is the gaps, these are the skills gaps, or even sort of the capability gaps that David was referring to, like the areas. Tools allow you to sort of group it, identify it, and sort of then direct those to the HR team. So when when the HR team are getting it, they're getting a lot more richness in those hiring requests where they're like, okay, it's not just they need an engineer that can code in Python. They're getting, okay, we're actually needing an engineer that's going to be working on these types of projects because these types of projects with these types of customers that would need experience understanding sort of this area, right? So they're getting a lot more richness of data. And often when HR teams see that, they're like, actually, this is super useful for them because they're getting a lot more information and they're able to sort of see, okay, I don't actually need four people. I actually just need two because they're going to be shared across these two different teams, right? So they're also getting a higher level picture of those requests, which is sometimes really hard to do in HR systems, or especially if companies are, spread out in different offices in different locations. So they can leverage sort of that richness of that data, that sort of argument of, hey, we're going to help save costs, right? We're going to help you make the right choices. Often that can help with the HR team sort of getting a lot more buy-in and saying, like, this can actually be a great data source for some SWP.
Amazing. Yes, thank you so much. That's very clever. I would also love to hear from you, David. If we put it very, very briefly, what do you think the opportunity is to de-silo strategic workforce planning and resource management? If we embark on this journey, it does require some effort, as we've just elaborated. It's not a no-brainer as such to make this relentless collaboration happen. But why would you love for everyone in the room to embark on that journey? What's the vision if this works well?
Well, the only true rationale for doing anything, I come to believe, is that there is a positive business outcome coming from it. The corollary of that is that you are solving a business problem and you have a business problem that you need to solve. Too often, we embark upon projects, whether it be operational ones or technical ones, without being clear as to why it is that we're going about doing it. And I don't think that there is any shortage of business problems that can be solved by a combination of operations and HR. Indeed, I think that there's a sort of a multitude of them that we could do an awful lot more about if only we were to sort of think in that way. So the vision for me is that the business sees us making a difference for them, and whatever shape that takes, and sometimes it doesn't have to be a full scale program of work. In fact, I argue quite a lot now that it's not as important to strategically plan the entire workforce as it is to plan for those parts of the workforce that are strategic. With things changing so rapidly as they are at the moment, do we actually need to be going, say, much beyond the regular attrition stats and projections, which are now sort of pretty much available for a number of BAU functions? But the pace of change in other areas is absolutely relentless. And something else I would say also, and that is that don't make the mistake of assuming that strategic workforce planning is a once a year activity. It is not. It is a constant. And it is actually, if you'll pardon the mixing of terms, it is an operational process by which you are looking at all of the different signals which are coming in and saying, how is this making a difference to our future? And indeed, the feedback you get from resource management as well is fundamental to that. There is a mutual dependency.
Yeah, and I agree. I was going to say that that's what I got from your book as well. I loved that you sort of went down that area as well. It's super important to understand that it's not, especially with AI coming as well, it's not granular. It's not you need to know what every single person. It's about sort of that big picture and that strategic vision, which is so important as well. So yeah, that was I was going to say, I was like, your book, you mentioned that, and that was just such a valuable point. I sort of put it on my own deck slide for our leadership team. So
I like that.
because
I like the fact you bought the book. I mean,
yeah,
that's
I'm gonna,
you know.
Well, it's very
Happy
because
happy days.
I told you I was also a nerd for SWP. So, but what I find is just is that idea that it's not a one and done, right? It's a thing that you have to constantly be evolving all the
Yes.
time. And it
Mm.
is just a really important thing to drive home to your leadership team. And I mean, we work for a resource management company, and I'm driving that home constantly because I think that is sort of mindset is like you do it once and then you're good for the year. And it's like, no, it's a thing that we must constantly be reviewing and reassessing to ensure we are really aligning with our own outcomes and desire and desired business outcomes.
Yes. I mean, without being too sort of without over egging this, if you're the Saudi Arabian oil company Aramco, and you did your strategic workforce plan sort of once a year, that probably not the best use of your time.
Good point. Love it. And Lisa, I'm also curious to hear from you. What benefits do you see in de-siloing both strategic workforce planning and resource management? What's
Well, I think there's obvious better outcomes for businesses, I think is the easy one to sort of hark on. But I think I want to answer that in a different way. I would say that this is a huge benefit to people themselves, right? I think when businesses are planning, what initially I said, people are what drives business and also what costs business. But I think people, when we're looking at those high outcomes, they forget that it's just people, right? It's human beings with lives, with families, with desires, with wishes, with progression wishes, and people that want to learn more, people that want to change departments. And I think what happens is often, at the leadership level, at the higher level, people forget that, right? It's not something that people realize. So what I kind of like the idea of like, because strategic workforce planning really is much more of a high level strategic function, while resource management is much closer to people. I like that it can actually help sort of remind people that fundamentally a workforce isn't a thing, it is a group, a collection of individuals, right? And to remember that that's what we have to look at it is just not one thing. It is many, many things together that is constantly evolving and aligning with the different markets as well. So just something to think about, that one of the greatest benefits is also just reminding everyone. Like I think there was someone who made a comment, and I think we've heard it before. It's like my team's at capacity, my team's at capacity, my team's at capacity. Absolutely, we forget that. But when you sort of break it down, that's an individual person. That's a father who missed his kid's recital. That's a mother who's going to go on burnout, right? There's so much more individuality that we forget about. So I think what can be really a huge benefit is when you de-silo them and you bring back that aspect of the individuality and that these are actually real people.
wow, amazing.
Oh, I could not agree more. I mean, and it's very easy to forget that. Yeah, you look at a lump of data, and this is a very old analogy of mine, but it is like some mercury. You look at it in the sort of the vial in the tube, and it looks like it's sort of something solid. And you stick it out on the desk, and it sort of kind of all runs in all kinds of different directions. We're not talking about a set of numbers. We're talking about a vast chemical soup, chemical and biological soup of different emotions, motivations, needs, desires. There's something very visceral and psychological about the consequences of the things that we do, that we forget at our peril. And indeed, if ever I do, then that really will be the time to stop.
Yeah, great point. Thank you both for driving that one home. I'm really curious. We kicked off, David, with your definition, and you hit on one point that made me curious. You talked about kind of the blending of disciplines, not just strategic workforce planning and resource management, but also workplace design. How is the way we work changing? So I would love to hear from both of you, and maybe Lisa, you could kick off. What precisely can people in our call today listening in do to become more attuned to the future of work? What are some resources? What are some conferences, books, podcasts, or other strategies that we can start to make it a habit to become more sensitive to what is unfolding?
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually think I would pass that over to David rather than me to answer that because I think this is a little bit more of his expertise.
Right.
Because I think I have some opinions on it, but I'd actually like David to kick that off. I'd like to hear his answer.
Well, I think the first thing I would say is that nobody has all of the answers, and many people don't have any. But there are some seriously good writers and thinkers on this subject. And if you're not already following people like Tyler Weeks of Marriott, Sandra Loughlin of EPAM, and Jason Averbrook, formerly of Mercer, then you are missing out because these people are smart and they see, they're reading the room constantly. One of the things which is definitely emerging. Yes, I probably can share the names in the chat, but at the minute I daren't try to sort of reach over to the keyboard because I'll knock the microphone. But we're definitely seeing a recognition that this sort of kind of fire hose of innovation, people are basically trying to sort of attach that to a very thin capillary of existing, a sclerotic capillary, by the way, of existing organizational change management and governance and change resistance. This stuff is not going to happen perhaps as fast as you might think it will, simply because in a lot of organizations, there is regulation. You can't just chuck this stuff at the wall and expect some of it to stick and that's going to be okay, guys. So I think we're going to see sort of a bit of a drag on proceedings, and I think we have to assume that humans in the loop are going to be more in the loop than perhaps some of the sort of the first naysayers were kind of anticipating. That's my guess. Having said that, people like Josh Bersin, are, I think, on the money when they say eventually we will see lots of agents and maybe super agents sort of doing this kind of stuff, but it's not going to act as a substitute for human judgment and for the purely human skills. I'll give you one example, sorry, and then I'll stop. A call center. Okay, a call center should be, everyone would say, well, yeah, AI is going to absolutely decimate that. Okay, is it? Have we actually thought that through? Okay, so AI can maybe handle a whole load of the simple stuff. But what are the consequences for the people who are left dealing with more frequent, complex, and difficult situations to handle? Are they going to be up for doing that? Are we actually going to need more of those because actually the traffic is likely to increase because of the technical complexity of the kind of situations that ordinary people are having to deal with? I mean, look at how life has changed for us. We now deal with masses of technology, loads of different sort of systems and devices. So I think, customer support is going to be on the increase, not on the decrease, and it's going to be of a different nature. When we talk about capabilities we no longer need or tasks we no longer need to do, how much time are we investing in thinking about the new tasks that we are going to find ourselves doing and the increased in capability that we are going to require as a consequence?
Oh, I'm glad David said that about support, so that reassures me and my team a little bit. But, and I think, but David's example is very good. I mean, I personally like to follow Melissa Valentine and Ivana Johnston, who's on Puzzle Partner, and sort of they're more about the sort of the organizational design with sort of the idea of the AI agent aspects as well. And I think the what David is saying is exactly what they're positing, which is the rise of a need of like what we call soft skills, right? The idea is like, we can teach an agent to code. I think that we can do that today, right? We can teach an agent to do that. But can we think of it can an agent really think through the infrastructure, the architecture needed to build to solve a specific problem for a specific business? And really AI doesn't do that, right? So it is the way of looking how our businesses are designed, what kind of skills will be needed, or rather what kind of capabilities, as David was saying, will be needed, will be different. But again, very much what David's saying, what that means is more the jobs will change, right? And I think one of the best examples we can sort of look at is when call center is a great one, because when, I don't know if everybody remembers, when maybe this dates me, there's a point where we went to telephone banking, right? Everything moved to the telephone before it went to the internet, which may be really dating me, but whatever. And the reality is that was all things like you'll just be pushing buttons, right? And the reality is what that ended up doing is frustrating people, and the organizations and even the companies like Amazon, who in the early stages were like, you know what? People still want to talk to people. People still want to engage with people. And they double down on that support level, and that grew their business, right? So I think AI is going to generate similar things, not just in support, but in other fields as well, where people are going to double down. People are going to realize that at the end of the day, we are still human beings, and we need human interaction. And often that's sort of, again, diminished when we're looking at things from the high level. But individuals want to talk to other people in many other fields, not just support, but in everything. And I think what's happening is sort of exactly what David is referring to as a capability shift, where we have to look at the capability of where they can deliver in that area, rather than just in the very strict, technical sense.
Yeah, awesome. And maybe just one point I read about in exactly this case of call centers is if now humans only deal with the super hard cases that can't be solved automatically by AI, then we also need to reconsider the work routine, because jumping from one hard case to the next without any pauses, without any light cases that are easy to solve and where happy customers may be the result, that can be extremely draining. So we need to take a step,
Absolutely.
consider how shifting tasks to AI leave the humans doing the tough, non-automatable things. Yeah. So
Yeah,
that's
because that could drive up attrition unless you're actually looking at how work in that space is being distributed.
100.
Completely agree.
Yeah. Awesome. Maybe one last question. We'll make it a super quick one. Give it your best shot. David, maybe you can kick us off. What is the role of AI specifically when we think about de-siloing strategic workforce planning and resource management?
I'm already seeing it make a big difference. Um, I'm still experimenting with it. I'm still sort of learning more about it. I think that it does a couple of things. I think firstly, it speeds up the work that I do, and should therefore give me more time to actually communicate, as
Mm.
opposed to simply try to um, manage data and its interpretation. Um, I think it's becoming pin sharp, super sharp on that. Really good research
Mhm.
capability. Um, the other thing I think it will do is to help to identify solutions and solution options much more quickly, so that you're providing sort of better synthesis
Mhm.
from the from the silos. I think it will also give much better scenario modeling, for example, as well. Uh,
Mhm.
so yeah, it's going to enable sort of more direct communication, I think, with the receiving functions. I think it's going to help to better orchestrate supply across organizations and respond more rapidly to demand signals that are coming in.
Mm.
Yeah, I'd agree. I'd say also it in many ways it doesn't replace people. It actually increases people's capacity, right? Because a lot of these chores that were, time consuming, that data analysis, data modeling, but even just very simple tasks of putting PowerPoints together and all those kinds of things that took a lot of time now take half that time, right? So at the end of the day, what it's doing is it's giving back capacity to people to do to concentrate on higher level work and to be more efficient, right? At the end of the day, if you're spending 10 hours, sort of putting data into a system and now it takes you an hour instead, you're gaining 9 hours back. And for those 9 hours, you can do much more high value work and work that you even as an individual want to do. Like nobody likes to enter data, right? But you might want to be able to solve a problem. You might be able to launch a new project. So it also on that level really increases organizations and individual people's capacity.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you see any other ways AI can support with relentless collaboration?
Yes, I can. I think the next step is not me asking the questions, but for the organizations themselves to ask the questions. And for that, there is going to, I think, ultimately be a series of agents that help individual teams to get at some of the answers. And as I see it, we'll also be looking at those answers and then stepping in to say, look, we can see the kind of problems which are developing or which could develop. Here are the solutions that, that you might want to consider, whether that be from a resource management, from a talent acquisition, or whatever perspective. But looking at fulfillment as an holistic enterprise as opposed to a series of different specialist solutions, I think is part of what AI is going to enable.
Amazing.
And I would just add as well, like AI is also something, it's also the great connector is what I would also argue in terms of this area too, because even Ron, like we have AI automation that you can actually leverage to connect different tools. But that's the key thing when if we go back to relentless collaboration to de-siloing. At the end of the day, often the issue is the data is held in different systems by different people, right?
Mhm.
And AI and AI automation tools can really create those links without, sort of expertise, and that connects the data and starts to create that ecosystem. So in many ways, AI can become the creator of that connection and ecosystem.
Amazing. Awesome. Thank you both so very much. I can't believe it's already, 1 hour later now. And you have been incredible panelists on this topic. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you, Lisa. Thank you, David, for sharing your expertise in such a delightful and also fun way, may I add. It's been a joy listening to you and exploring this topic together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you so much.
Nice. And I just want to give a shout out to our upcoming webinar in June. On the 16th of June, we'll dive into dealing with uncertainty. So very much to the point that we had at the beginning of our session today, the planning cycles are starting to get a lot shorter. We can't really plan in this dynamic environment that we're currently in. And this session will dive into what does all of this mean for resource managers? How can we deal gracefully and effectively with uncertainty? What are some strategies on the business level, but also on the personal level? So we would love to have you join for that session. Edem is going to share the link in the chat. And with that, I want to thank you again very much to our speakers and also to our audience. You have been extremely engaged today. I loved all the messages that you shared in the chat. Thank you for sharing your love. Thank you for your great commentary. It's been absolutely wonderful. Thank you.